Hello, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and I am the streamer for this channel. And we work on a Django app. Django is a web framework in the Python programming language, and a side project that I work on. And my goal is to teach people what I know about Django. I've been doing it for many years, and can teach you something along the way. If you're learning or if you're experienced, I think I have something to offer to lots of folks. Tonight we're going to work on changing the test runner on my application. So I've been using Django's built-in unit test based test case class, and I want to switch to Pytest. I want to switch because I've been writing tests this past week, and I just hit this barrier where I was getting frustrated with using certain aspects of unit test. So the plan is to add Pytest to Django, this Django application, which is something that can be done pretty readily, and I'll walk you through the steps. I haven't actually done it myself recently, but I think we'll be able to manage it and fix up the test to use the new Pytest style syntax, which is nice and clean, and then move on to the next thing. So that's the plan, to work on integrating Pytest in the project, and that's how we're going to go forward. But before I get started on that, I'll just say a couple notes that you can follow me on mattlehman.com. There I have a mailing list and ways to get in touch with me on GitHub or Twitter or whatever as MB Lehman. I also have a Patreon page where if you're enjoying the content that I'm putting out, you're welcome to throw a few dollars my way. I'd be super grateful. To that end, I want to thank Rob and Mark and Patrick and a new patron, Eric, for your contributions. It's really awesome. I really am just super grateful for you contributing in that way. That's really cool. And final note, there is a Discord below, a link in the Twitch page that you can get to if you want to ask me questions that don't quite fit in a tweet and are a little bit more involved. I check on the Discord, and happy to answer questions as I can there. Okay, so that's sort of the beginning part out of the way. Let's talk about what we're going to do. So I actually want to create a new issue so that we can have something to work from. And that issue is going to be add Pytest as the test runner. And so I want to put an issue in here, not because I need it necessarily, but just to give you an outline of the things that I'm thinking about as the steps that we need to take care of. So the first one is to add Pytest Django, which is the package that makes it possible to use Pytest and Django together. And then we need to make some configuration changes to make that work together. And after the overall suite is working, if as like proof by we can run Pytest and everything will run, then a bunch of stuff will probably be broken at first. So fix the broken parts, and then finally we'll be able to start to actually get the benefit out of Pytest, which is assertion rewriting. So switch assertions. And I don't know that we'll get all this done in the stream. Well, that's my plan. And I'll show you the before state so that we can have a place to work from as well. So you get a clear understanding of what's going on. So I think that's the overall process that we're going to follow. And let me show you the test suite itself so you can get a feel for that. So let's open up a test file here of any variety, test views somewhere. And if I run the suite, I'm running it inside of Vim right now, which is something, it's a requirement for me because of my flow. I want to be able to continue to do that. So I might need to make some tweaks to my Vim settings too, as just part of it. And because this is my project, this is important to me, because I think what my plugin will do is it'll notice that there's a manage.py file, and it'll try to run manage.py test, which won't be correct for using Pytest. So we'll have to tweak some stuff, and that's okay. But you can see what's happening is it's running Python manage.py test, which is running inside of a virtual environment, and it's running the entire test suite. So there's 155 tests, and they execute in a couple of seconds. So that's where we're starting from. Okay, so step one in this process is going to be to update the requirements file that I have. And I did not mean to do a recording of Vim. So, we're going to go to the requirements dev file, which is where I keep all of my developer tools for my project. I like to have them separate from what actually gets installed on the production server. These are tools that I know are not going to be needed by the production code. And it's just a kind of a way to keep things sort of clean. And we're going to install Pytest Django, but I don't know which version. So the first thing I want to do is go to PyPI and check out what is the latest and make sure that it supports the version of Django I'm on. I'm pretty positive it does because I'm on latest Django stuff, so I'd be shocked if it doesn't. So PyPI, and the package itself is called Pytest Django. Or I think, yeah, I think that's the one. Confusingly, there's a Django Pytest. That's disturbing. Be very easy to get the wrong package name. Okay, so let's check out the home page just to make sure this is the one I'm thinking of, because I'm pretty sure it's not Django Pytest. Yep, this is it. So we want the latest version, and the latest version is 3.9.0. So I'm going to come to my requirements dev file, and I'm going to come to where this is all alphabetically sorted. It doesn't have to be, that's just the way I roll, and say Django of 3.9.0. And by the way, if you have any questions for me, I'm more than happy to take them. The purpose here is to work on a project, but also engage with you and have discussion. So if you have questions about what's going on, we're working on Pytest Django right now. If you have some other question about Python or Django or web development, you're free to ask me that too. So ask me anything about Python, Django, or web dev. Just leaving that out in case other people will show up later. Okay, so we've got our Pytest Django line added here, and I'm going to do a pip install. So pip install -r requirements dev. I've already got this virtual environment activated, so oh, interesting. I already had, so something must have been using Pytest Django as a dependency. Is that true? That's weird. Or maybe I did it as a test a while ago. That's what it is. So this virtual environment I've had from the start of the project, and I did try Pytest Django. And the reason I resisted Pytest Django for a long time has to do with database access. And recently, I figured out a way around my problem, which is what's making me reevaluate Pytest Django and hoping to get the benefits out of it. And I will explain that as we hit on it. So that's why there was already a Pytest Django here, but it wasn't being used. Okay, so now that we have Pytest Django, let's go read the docs for it and find out the configuration that we need. So we need a Pytest ini file, which is Pytest's way of specifying configuration. And then we need to add a settings, some settings stuff to it. And it looks like we can get by with just these two settings. So let's do that. So let's go to the root of the repository. Let's come to and create a new file. We'll call it pytest.ini. That's where all the configuration options are going to go. And the docs say to add a Pytest section, ini style section. And then we add a Django settings module. So my Django settings module is named differently. And we'll put it in here. So the Django settings module for me is, what is it actually? Here it is. So project testing settings is the name of mine. So you have to tell Django where your settings are coming from, and for it's not going to use the settings that my production application uses, because that has different configuration in database configuration and a whole bunch of different stuff. And this settings file that I have over here actually has a bunch of optimizations in it too, to make tests run even faster by disabling migrations and using different hashers and different kinds of stuff that will improve things. So it's important to use a different settings configuration. Otherwise, it's just not going to work out. So we have those two things, and maybe that's it. Well, it does seem like that's all they're indicating here. And they have this comment of specifying the Python files patterns. I don't know. We might want to look at why they're saying that, because I don't know that holds true. Or like, I think Pytest is already does discovery and may know these files, or it knows what files to look for. So I don't know what value it's adding to specify those. Sorry, I blanked out for a second there. So let's run Pytest and see what happens. Okay. What happened? Bunch of stuff failed. Here's where it gets fun. Like I said, we have to fix the broken stuff. So, I mean, if we go back to our issue, we've already added that. That was pretty easy. And the configuration change appears to be not much, so that seems pretty easy too. I'm not sure what's happening here. Feels a lot like Pytest is unaware of what's going on, which seems wrong. So I gotta, something else is curious here. And we're going to stare at it until we figure it out. So let's read it from the top. So we did run Pytest. It did find 3.7.6 is the Python version. This is the version of Pytest I'm using. And it found the Pytest INI file that we just created. And it's saying the plugins that it's finding that are specific to Pytest are Django Test Plus, that I'll talk more on in a little bit, and the Django plugin, which is the other thing that we should have installed at 3.9.0. So that is correct. And the question is, why is the actual call failing? So we might have to do a search for the error message. I have a feeling it will show up pretty rapidly. But before we do that, let's make sure we read the documentation, because it might say to do something differently. My tests are not being found. Okay, so it's looking for files. So like I said, Pytest uses a default setting of looking for files like this. This is the name that I apply to all my test files, so that should be correct. So I don't really need to follow this advice here, because I never use test.py and I never name my files with _tests. So that's cool. Next question is, why are we seeing an error message? And well, before I do that, let's keep reading on the main documentation page. So here's some why you should use this versus why you should use Pytest at all. I don't need to, I'm going to go over that as we get into it. So let's keep digging. So we installed it. I did point, it didn't complain about the settings module. Could not import. Is that what it says? Requested setting installed apps, but settings are not configured. Must either define the environment variable. Maybe I spelled it wrong. Django settings module. That looks like that. The section's name is Pytest. Is that matching up still? Pytest. And just to be certain, I'm going to copy, paste, and see what I did. It's the settings module, not setting module. Oops. Configuration. Okay, let's try this again. Would you look at that? That's interesting. Okay, we're getting getting new stuff that I didn't even anticipate, and we're getting the suite running. This could be way shorter than I thought. So, all right, let's talk about why I resisted Pytest for a long time, and maybe something about, maybe it's this Django Test Plus has changed something, but there was a reason that I avoided this plugin for a while. And if we get into the guts of this a little bit more, maybe it's in the usage section. No, here it is. The reason I resisted this is because of this right here. When, according to the documentation, when you want to run a test that uses the database, you would have to add this Pytest mark DjangoDB. And the way I run my tests, nearly every test that I run uses the database, because I'm a big proponent of using Factory Boy, which generates model records. It inserts stuff into the database to have some test data that's realistic, and I wanted it all the time. And so when I did this initially and tried this out, the test would not work at all if I didn't have this mark. And I definitely did not want to have to add a decorator to every single unit test that I wrote ever. That was going to drive me crazy. So, frankly, I'm kind of puzzled as to why these passed. I sort of expected some of these to fail. So before we get into the warnings, there's something going on there that isn't right. I want to look at one of these tests and see if we can figure out what is happening to make them pass. And there's a good way to do that. And it's a really cool tool, and it's called Setup Show. So let's do this. Let's find a particular test that we can use. So I've got a couple tests in test models here, which is almost certainly going to use the database. So if we go to that file, we check it out. Yeah, here's a good example. So it's test user, test school, and that one uses a factory, so that's creating a record. So we should be able to test this by doing Pytest, and then homeschool, users, tests, test models. And then the syntax for this next part is a little funky, but if you want to run a specific test, you use double colon. So you do double colon, then in this case I have to give it the test case name, that's test user, and then one more for test school. And that should run that one test. And it does. That's pretty speedy. So what I want to figure out is, what was it that caused us to have a database? Because if you read the documentation over here, it basically says you're not going to get a database created for you unless you use this mark. So something must have happened that told us to use a database. By default, Pytest Django will set up Django databases for them. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm still confused about this. So what setup show can do is it shows you all of the extra test helper things that Pytest has. They're called fixtures, and it will show you which fixtures are used to set up and which ones are used to tear down. It's a good diagnostic tool to figure out what's going on. And it shows also the relationships between those fixtures, so why one would depend on the other. So I expect to see the DB fixture as one of them, but I want to see which piece of the code is causing that DB fixture to come into play. Okay, so it's a lot of information, but it should give us a clear idea of what's going on here. So here we can see that there's a bunch of database fixtures that it's setting up. Those happen at the whole suite level. That's what this S is kind of indicating, which stands for session, which is Python or Pytest way of saying just at the global level of the test run. And then there's sessions, there are fixtures that happen for classes, and then there are fixtures that can happen on the specific test function too. And so you kind of read up, all of this code got set up for the whole test suite, and then we did it for just that class. Those things would happen in the class, and then just for this one test, all these fixtures were needed. And if you ran more of these, in fact, let's do that. Let's run 2 of them. So let's run it for test user. You'll actually see this kind of twice. So the session ones, the top ones that happen, they only happen once. And the class ones are only happening once because it's one class. But then you can see that the individual tests that are run, test create school and test school, they both get their own set of function level fixtures. So there's kind of a nesting that happens here for how often fixtures get run between. It's not really pertinent to the exact piece that we're talking about, but I'm trying to deduce what was causing the database. It looks like the database comes from the fact that this is a unit test based class. Okay, that's interesting. So Pytest likes to use functions. That's just what they do. But because we're deriving from a unit test style test case, it must be a signal to this thing that it should set up a database because it's using from Django's test case. That's interesting. So I'm going to, for the sake of seeing it fail and showing you what I was running into when I started this experiment, I'm going to run this as if it was just a function. And so take away that. And so now, well, this gets harder. Okay, we're going to comment out some stuff because it's not really pertinent. Like, I'm not trying to really illustrate all these facets, but I can run a school factory, which should generate some test data, and you can see it fail. That's what I'm trying to show. So this test isn't doing anything anymore, but that's not important. So let's come back here, and now let's run test school, which should be a function. I suspect that this will fail. Yeah, okay. And here's where they give you the warning that says, hey, wait a minute, this is not marked with the Django database marker, so you don't have a database. And that, like I said, was going to be really annoying, so I didn't want to do that. So it's interesting that I can use a test case to do this, but frankly, I don't want to. I want to use a different style. The different style is to use the way that Pytest will let you group tests. You can still use a class, but you don't derive from the test case class. So I'm going to switch this to be, actually I'm on Python 3, so I don't even need that. I can do like this. At work, I'm on Python 2, so you have to subclass from object. That restriction went away in Python 3. So we're going to comment out some of these things for a minute. And now this will still fail, but it'll fail for a different reason. It'll fail because the make user is no longer there. So we're going to come back up to running that one test. And yeah, you can see now it says, I don't know what this is, make user, because that was coming from something else. So the other piece in the equation that I have that I've been using is a tool called Django Test Plus. And it's a nice set of utility functions that help add to tests, and they assume that you can run it in a couple of different styles. They want it to work out of the box for Django's normal test case stuff. So what I have here as homeschool.test test case, I'll bring it up, is deriving from this test case from Test Plus. It's this other package. And it's got all of that on it. But I don't want to use that. I want to use get away from this test class stuff and use a fixture approach, which is, fixtures are not my favorite thing in the world, but they're appropriate for working with Pytest. And so it means that make user is not something that's going to be available to me in this future. So this test plus package also includes Pytest stuff as well, and it's just a matter of finding it. Where is Pytest? I know you're in here somewhere. There's a search. Let's search for Pytest. It's bound to come up. Really? All right. It might just be on their GitHub page, because I know it's in here. I know they offer it. And I say they. It's made by a consultancy, or it might be maintained by a single individual. I'm not sure, but the consultancy is a Django shop called RevSys, I believe. So we can go to directly to the GitHub page where they'll talk in more details than what's on the documentation. And we will see. Now I'll search for Pytest. Here we go. That when you're not using the test case class, the alternative is they give you a fixture called TP for Test Plus. And it has the same functions available that are available on the test case, but they are now as a fixture. And we'll have to do some tweaking along the way to get it working. I need to figure out how to set this up for setting the user factory and stuff that I want to do this. So things to learn. Okay. So the way to add a fixture is Pytest will take any extra parameters that you add to the test method or function name and look for a fixture of the right name. So there's kind of a registry of fixtures. And so the fact that we're running with the Django Test Plus plugin, which we can see right here, we know that the Test Plus fixture will be registered with that. And I want to even say that you can do a listing of fixtures. I don't remember the exact incantation to get that. It's one of the options, but there's some option that will list all the fixtures. It might just be -- fixtures or something. Yep, -- fixtures. So we can do this. We can say Pytest fixtures, and it can show you what testing tools are available and where they come from. So most of these will come from Pytest Django or the built-in ones from Pytest itself. And then at the bottom, we can see that the Test Plus plugin exposes an API client, a TP for the plugin, and this, I don't know what this TP API is, probably something similar. So we're going to use those. Let's come back over to this area, and I'm going to try and convert this test to use TP instead of self, because all of the make user and this were coming from the test class, and that's no longer true. And the big thing about this, the whole reason why I'm making this change, is I want to change my assertions to switch from using assert equal and all those standard unit test style methods to using straight asserts, because I find that the asserts syntax is cleaner looking, which makes the test more readable. And Pytest is really smart about it. So if things are wrong, it does a really good job of showing the differences, in my opinion. I have found some weaknesses in the way the Django test case shows the differences, especially if you have a lot of content, like 2 big dictionaries. It doesn't do the best job for various reasons. So we'll change this, and the way you work with a Pytest is you use the keyword assert, and then you do what you want to do using what seems like standard Python logic operations. So before it was assert equal, now we're using double equality with the assert to say the same thing. And this is still going to fail if we run it, because I still haven't fixed the make user problem. So we need to find where make user is included for the fixture version of this. So here's make user. It exists on the test case class. And I'm going to just keep going through this until I find, hopefully what I'm looking for. Okay, it's not there, which is unfortunate. So we'll try it out, see if make user is on the TP fixture or not. And if it's not, we'll keep exploring. I'm going to guess for the moment that it's on TP. Okay. We're in the right direction. So this indicates that it is, in fact, on TP because that complained about hitting the database. And here's where I'm going to apply the fix that I realized, at work at my job, we use Pytest, and I was struggling for a long time because we never had to use this mark on test at work, and I didn't know what it was. And I finally figured it out the other day. You have the ability to write your own fixtures. And one of those fixtures was included in every test automatically through a feature called auto use, which I'll show you in a minute, and was including the database fixture to set up a database. So that seems like the way that is possible to take advantage of this, of setting up, basically declaring I want every test in my test suite to use a database without having to set that specific decorator on it. So that's what motivated me to make this change. So we'll try it. We'll go, we're going to create a new file, which is where Pytest will look for fixtures, and we're going to call the file conftest.py. That's just what Pytest refers to it as. Conftest.py, Pytest will discover it and know that that's where your fixtures are, and will kind of register them automatically. And so I'm going to put in a new fixture here, and the fixture I'm going to call it use DB. And here's the important thing. It's going to take the DB fixture. And the way this works is any parameter that shows up is a fixture that fixture requires. So what does that mean? If we come over here and look at this test method, you can see it. It's right here. It's about to use tp.makeUser. So in order to use that, it needs to get it from somewhere. So it gets it as an argument. Fixtures can do that themselves. Fixtures can ask for other fixtures, and they can be dependent. In fact, when we looked at setup show, you can see that this class level fixture, it's using the Django DB blocker fixture, and that's how it's working. So I want to say that my fixture is going to use the database fixture, and that's really like all the implementation that I would have to add. So there's a couple other things that we need to add to make this work. We need to import Pytest, because we need to say Pytest as a decorator, Pytest.fixture. And we need to say that this is an auto use, and we want it to be true. Okay. And I could be explicit about this and say what the scope is. I mentioned in the output there's a session scope, there's class scope, and there's function scope. So I could say scope is equal to function like this, but that's the implied default. So I'm going to actually leave it out. This is maybe one time where I probably should be explicit over implicit, but I'm okay with the way it is. So now by adding this one fixture, what I'm saying is every test should automatically use the useDB fixture. And the useDB fixture is saying, I want to use the database fixture, which in turn creates a database. So that failure from before should now pass. And we can trace it through. We can even see what happened. So we've got the setup of useDB, which used the database fixture. The DB fixture uses Django DB blocker, and so on. So that is how I plan to do this. And there is one little gotcha that may or may not come up. If a fixture uses the database before this is ready and doesn't declare that it needs a database, then that's going to cause a problem. And I noticed, although it's out of order here, so maybe it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. It was a corner case that I encountered at work, but may not be applicable here. So I'll add a comment to remind myself what this is for and say, make every test have a database accessible. And then we'll say this avoids needing to add a Pytest mark Django DB to every test. Okay. All right, so we have more to figure out here. There's a problem with this test that's very subtle. And the problem is that make user, in fact, we might even be able to dig into it and look at it. Yeah. So make user wants to use a user factory if you define it. So I have a user factory that builds my user records that are custom using my custom user. But what you can see here is that if it doesn't have a user factory, it will create a test user just using its own, method of doing that rather than using the factory from Factory Boy. And the way that the test case got around this is by having in my test class, which I defined over here, I set this user factory attribute. So that's how my tests got to use my custom user factory. So if I ever have a change in my user model where I need to add in extra data that is customized to my application, I want to make sure it's using this user factory, which it would add that custom data. What's unclear to me is that in this new scheme where I'm now using a fixture, how do I tell it to use my user factory? And I am not certain of that. So we might need to go actually look at the Test Plus plugin and get into the code, and maybe there's some attribute that it reads somewhere that I'm not aware of, or maybe I can tell the TP plugin what thing to use. Interesting. It says test case. It's pulling the test case from the plugin. So we need to somehow instruct it to use my version of test case. Because here it is, it's got user factory equal none. And it pulls from base test case, but I don't know that I want it to do that. So there's some intriguing aspects of this. Let's go back to the documentation and see if there is information on how to override the test case. Okay. This is what I just showed you. I had my own file, my project test.py, same thing as following the docs here. And this is curious. I don't see it. So maybe there's not an obvious way to do this. I wonder if there's any bugs about it. Because it's not like there's no hook in here to come into this fixture and redefine which test case it uses. So short of, I could monkey patch the test case, which feels kind of nasty, but doable. but I don't know that I want to actually do that. All right, well, I think what I'm going to do, because for the moment my user factory isn't very exciting. I'll even show you. It's a pretty straightforward factory that is doing nothing of consequence. It does set a specific username, but that's not super important right now, I think. So maybe I'll poke some people online and figure out if there's something going on there that I'm not aware of other ways to configure that. So we'll take it on faith that this make user is going to produce something useful for the moment. And I think the next thing I want to try and do is make sure that my Vim editor actually runs this. So I'm running a command, and you can see here that it's still running python manage.py when I run that command. So I have to use some local configuration in order to fix this. And I'm frankly drawing a blank on the tool that I use. So I'm going to go to my vimrc, and I apologize, this is not super specific to Python and Django. This is more specific to me as a Vim user, but you're getting exposed to my whole process. The plugin that I use is something called Local Vimrc. Right there. We're going to go to Local Vimrc. And I just can never remember what the name of the file is. So what I have is the ability to set local Vim configuration that in a specific project. And put a file in the directory. Yeah, here it is. vimrc local.vim. Okay. So we'll come back and we'll create a new file, call it vimrc local.vim. And then we need to go to my plugin that I use for tests called Vimtest. And there's a way to specify a different runner. So we're going to steal this line, drop it in here. And if all works according to plan, I'm going to quit out of Vim so that it reloads the thing. I'm going to start up Vim. And so my test runner should now be the Pytest runner. So if I come back to that test file, so test, there's the user's test models file. And I come back to the same test case and I run it. Yeah, there we go. So now it's running Pytest instead of the Django command because I've overridden the default runner for the Django project that I'm on. And this plugin is smart enough that it knows the Pytest syntax of using double colons and figures all that out itself. It's programmed to do that. Okay, so now let's try running the whole suite. Okay, I've got one failure. There's a noticeable change here, and I don't think I really care because I don't really need to run the whole suite very often. But this is slower, and it's slower by about a second, and it doesn't really matter that much because I normally am running like a single test or a test file, but just an observation that there are some trade-offs that come from switching test runners. But let's start fixing up some tests. So let's come back to the issue, and we've sort of fixed the broken parts. I'm going to leave a to-do comment of figure out how to use a custom user factory for the TP fixture. That should be possible. Doesn't appear to be. And maybe if it's not possible, maybe I go write a branch to make it work because I would like that aspect to work on this. And now we need to come in here and fix assertions. So we'll take this and we'll add the TP fixture. We'll change this to TP make user, and then we'll change this to assert and we'll delete to, actually delete all the way through there. So now if I run this file, 2 tests pass. And there are some things that I've grown to like about Pytest that are kind of nice. For instance, the output is a little bit nicer. It's like more information, reminders of like how many tests are running, percentage status, and like, so if you had really slow tests, this would be more helpful. But it also is just nice to see some color. I don't know, maybe it's a little thing, but we'll see a failure too that will make this really evident. Oops, this was just broken though. I need to switch that to the actual assert. Yeah, okay. And that lets us clean out this import. And it also is going to bring up the question of what do I do about the test file? I'm guessing long term, what I'm going to want to do is be able to hook that fixture to point at this test case file. But I assume this test case file derives from unit tests, so I don't know how that would all hang together. Maybe that's really what I need to do is pull from the base test case that was in the code. But again, that's a different issue. So we're going to ignore the rest of this file for now, and start changing tests. I think what you'll see, hopefully what you'll see, is that the resulting tests, they just read a little cleaner, because where I had the camel case style classic unit test, assert equal, assert not in, becomes plain assertions. And I also wanted to show a failure to show you the difference. So let's run the whole suite and figure out what the next file is. So let's work on the students' test views, I guess. I think it's also going to show us some things that we can. Oh, you know what's happening here? I'm using a version of Django all auth, and it's giving me a deprecation warning because Pytest wants to show warnings by default. That's new. And it's also being pretty intelligent about this and saying all of these tests have suffered from this same warning. I don't know how it's actually grouping that. It's really curious. Yeah, and maybe it might just be I need to update my Django all auth to make that warning go away, because the warning message is going to be annoying. Especially, I may turn on a flag that makes warnings behave as errors, so that I am saved in the future from that. So let's go to the students area, students test views. And if we run the file, now we should see just the 2 times where it comes up or 3, I guess, for the unauthenticated access. It's where it's trying to use some of that feature from all auth. So what I want to do, first step, is delete the test case, which is going to make all of the test case classes in here suddenly incorrect. And I want to change them to do this, to just be basic classes. Okay, so that gets rid of the 3 errors there. But if I run this now, I'm going to get a lot of failures because I'm accessing things that don't exist on many of these. And we need to switch them to DP, their TP equivalent. So there's a lot of this will be changing this to stuff like this. Oh, fascinating. So I'm gonna also, I guess maybe there's some renamed stuff in here too that I'm depending on that's not available. Okay. This is assert login required. Oh, we looked at the code, and we saw that the plugin, the thing that we're getting back from TP is basically a test case class. So I'm wondering if I'm now like hitting on bugs that are in this project that haven't been fixed. Let's see what kind of pull requests are out here. Nope. Let's check out base test case, see what's in here. Because I could either I'm hitting bugs or I'm using the wrong method name. Like this assert login required. That just seems like a straight up bug. Huh. Try it again, see what it said. TP assert login required, which is coming into the assert login required. You know what it is? The test case object that's in this class in the plugin doesn't have assert redirect because it's based on this class, which doesn't have every method from Django, right? So that's sad. I guess it has some of them. And here's where you can see where they mix them together. So this is the test plus stuff. And the test case I was getting before has that mixed together. So it's possible that I may not be able to get as far along as I want to. All right, that's interesting. But there might be some benefits that come out of this. All right, let's undo all that stuff then. Let's go right back to test case. Like, is there really a problem here? That the fact that these all pass. So, I guess sometimes I could use assert login required, like if I wanted to do specific methods that are on the test case. But when I have direct assertions, maybe I can sprinkle in Pytest. So let's find one where it's an assertion. And it might be harder to find than we think. Because these are views, there are a lot of assertions on what's in the context. And it's checking context against specific stuff. So really I'm looking for assert equal, assert in, those kind of things, and none of these fit that bill so far. Okay, here we go. Here's assert equal. So if I run this particular test, it's going to pass. It's just one test. And let's change this to assert. And switch it to be like this and run it again. So by running in Pytest now, Pytest is smart enough to know how to work with unit test cases. The downside of this approach that I haven't hit yet because I'm not using any other fixtures is that unit test style test cases, like what is listed here being a subclass, cannot really use Pytest fixtures. But maybe that's not a big deal. In fact, in fact, if I'm running test case, let's go back to that user models, test models. And let's return this to the way it was. How can I do that quickly? I'm just gonna check out the original. We'll do homeschool users. I'm gonna check out the original. So I basically destroyed all the work that I did a minute ago, but that's okay. I'm not really losing a lot. And so what we can do is we can change this back to the nicer style on this test, like that. And the test will run and pass. And we can do the same thing here. Change it to assert and equal, like that. So we got the nice benefit of the assertions. Test still runs. And the fact that they're coming from unit tests makes sure that the database is set up. So if all of my files are using the standard test case, then that little conf test file that I put in here, I don't need this anymore until I get to the day where I decide to actually use some Pytest fixtures. There might be some cases where that becomes useful. I don't know. But for today, I'm going to keep this simpler and get rid of it and try and run the whole suite. Okay, we still get the warnings. We still get the good output displayed, status of everything, and all the tests pass. Cool. So the rest of this project then, for switching to Pytest, is a quick scan over the files to see which assertions that I can change to be cleaner, that aren't using these helper methods like getCheck200. And I imagine there aren't actually going to be that many. As I said, like a lot of these are testing views, and there just aren't that many things to check. But here's where it's the models files that I think will have a lot more impact. All right, so let's do a scan of, let's go straight down the list to just be systematic about this, see what we can see. So we'll go to the core app, which is the first app I have. It's all a views file. And we're going to scan through and look for assertions. And look for non-custom assertions is the big important part. And then it might give me an opportunity as well to show you like what happens when the data is different and what does Pytest show differently than Django. Okay, here's a good example of how much this is going to get cleaned up. So this says assert true. So let's change this to assert. And now we're saying assert that the length of the schedule of courses is greater than 0. So there's not, you don't have to say assert true. It's just, that's what assert means. You're asserting the validity of something. And whatever returns has to be true. So the whole condition is very clear about what it's doing. So I think that kind of adds a lot of quality to it. If I said replace this with a 9, so this is now failing, here's where we start to get the benefit of Pytest. So you can see that it's telling you what the left-hand side is on the equation. The value is 1. That's what it got from the length calculation. And then it also tells you what the right-hand side is, the value that I put in as the expected data. But what's even cooler about it is it starts to like inspect into the data to say like, you probably wanted to look at this data. So here's what was in that dictionary lookup at that course's key. It was this a length of something that courses, and it's a deep structure here, but that's useful context. In contrast, in fact, let's switch it back to the old assert, which looked like this, and save that. And so now we can get, the test will pass. Cool. But now let's change this back to that 9. And here's where we don't get the benefit of Pytest. So when you're using the classic unit test style methods of assert true and such, those methods aren't doing any of Pytest additional help in the background. So you're left wondering, like, well, why is this false? Like, what is the length? You didn't tell me what the length was. So now I have to go and print out the length to figure out what it was. That seems like a bunch of work. So the flow would be, well, I know it fails, so let me print out length of schedules 0 and courses. And, you'll probably make some typos like I'm prone to doing along the way. And so I'm printing that out, and if syntax error, screwed up. That was an actual syntax error I didn't mean to make. Printing it out, and okay, so Pytest is now telling me, oh, the value is 1. So I hope you'll agree with me that Pytest, by giving this extra data, is way more convenient. Like, you immediately see what the difference was, which is why I want to use it as much as I can, because it is nice. So we'll switch it back to 0, make the test pass again, because I'm not here to write broken tests, I'm here to actually fix stuff. We'll keep scanning. Now, this is what I'm curious about. I did not... So this assert context is still coming from Django. I'm wondering how Pytest is going to handle this, because this is coming from test plus. It's not coming from Pytest. So I'm going to delete one single character there so that they don't match and see what happens. Okay, so this is still using Django as a style of asserts. Pardon me. And you can get a clear... I'm sorry, I'm frogging my throat. Sorry about that. You can get a clear picture of why this isn't all that useful. Like, it has the first element differing, and it says you can set an attribute on here to see more, which I've done in the past, but it's not the best. So what if we do this instead? If instead of saying assert context, we take it out and we say there's a get context function. So we can say schedules equals self get context schedules. And here we can say assert that schedules is equal to the list of expected schedule. Just like the assert that's below, they're the same. The difference is, whoops, I'm missing a T or an R. The difference is now one is using Pytest's method of rewriting stuff and the other is not. And so now if I do this and run the test, what you'll see instead is, well, maybe it's not all that much better. There is a difference in how accessible it is, though, in terms of seeing the difference. So this is all crammed together. That's true. Not great. But it is giving you a hint of you can use a VV to test this. So to test this the Django way to see more context, I have to modify the test case, and I have to add self max diff equal none. And that tells, in fact, we can see it. If I just switch these, it tells Django to dump out all of the data so that we can do the comparison. Okay. And that's not very fun to have to edit your test case, your test function in order to see that. So what Pytest says instead is you really change how you're calling Pytest and telling it to be more verbose. So I'm going to put this back the way it was, and I'm going to use my test plugin and give it the double V option that Pytest was saying, and it will show me more data here. And here's it. So this is where you can finally see where I think Pytest even being more helpful as well. It's not immediately obvious, but the more you get to read these, the more you can see the difference. It's like it's showing you, here's the question mark is this line right here, and where they differ is this one has this line and this one has this line, and those two things are different from each other. So it kind of highlights, it does a better job of highlighting what's different about stuff if you're trying to do comparisons. So I think that's going to be useful over Assert Context for these scenarios where I have these big, gigantic data structures. I'm not going to do it all the time because Assert Context is a convenient shortcut for the simple stuff. But for these big data ones, it's going to be useful. So it's more Assert Context. And I'll probably change these as I encounter them and need to do debugging. Like there's no sense in changing all of them. But this is a great example right here. I really am not crazy about this assertion, this assert method. Like the way you have to read it is not great. So I'm going to comment it out just so we can do a side-by-side comparison. So we'll duplicate it, and we're going to change to this. We're going to say assert task, and we're going to say not in So let's contrast the readability of the two things. So assert not in, the first parameter is the key that you're looking for, and then the second parameter is the list. But you don't really know that unless you know the API method. In this second one, I mean, this reads exactly like the Python syntax for where you would do the same thing in the code. So you say assert task not in, and then it has the same thing to check against. So we get that test passing. So I think that's where Pytest really wins in the cleanup of those kind of assertions. So the rest of this is going to be me changing these things to be cleaner. And then checking that the output still looks good. Got some assert context stuff. Assert not equal. So we'll say assert and delete all that part. And we want to say not equal to an empty list. It's kind of a weird test. Test school year for user only. Okay, well, I'm not going to worry about the test right now. Okay, here's a good one. Assert true. I love the assert true ones because they end up just being assert. And the false ones end up being assert not. Here's another example of a list one. Or I guess this one's not a list, this one's a string comparison, but the effect is, the cleanup effect is the same. it will just read nicer. Now it tells a story in the way that I don't think the other one did. Assert that the URL is in the response location, which is the header on the response. So I'm making this change now because the project is, in the scheme of things, I only have 150 tests. It's not that many. And it's something you want to settle on some of your tools early, so you don't have thousands of tests that you have to upgrade. It is possible to change tools in the future. Like, there's nothing that could necessarily keep me on Pytest forever. But it's nice to get this in early. Otherwise, I'd be doing this on a lot more tests. Okay. And I'll probably finish off this file, and then I think we'll call it a night. I think the rest of this is mostly just an exercise for me to do this stuff. And, you know, I walked you through what I think to be the core bits of this. That's a curious one. I don't want to spend too much time digging deep into this if it's not going to be interesting to watch too much. But to give you an idea of here's everything that I had to do in order to make this test upgrade happen. And we're getting to the bottom. Okay, last couple. I keep messing up typing assert. You think I'd have that down by now? I guess not. Whoops. Okay, and then one more. Okay, let's make sure I didn't break all the tests there. Okay, cool. So what do? We added Pytest. And it turned out to be pretty easy. The first thing, I made a mistake with configuration and typed the name of the setting wrong. Don't do that. And when it complains about not being able to find the right installed applications, check and make sure you're doing it right, because the instructions couldn't have been simpler. The nice part about this is, coming from a pre-existing Django test case, Pytest just seemed to work. Like, the fact that it was relying on test case classes that exist from Django was signal enough to Pytest Django to allow those to pass. I would imagine that the reason for that is the developers of this project want to make it as easy as possible to start using Pytest. So kudos on y'all for whoever's behind Pytest Django. Good work. I did show you like what would happen if I started to make these things be functions and dealing with this whole mark stuff. That's the one aspect of Pytest Django that I'm really not crazy about. I understand the motivation. Like, it's if the idea behind it is maybe you're writing tests that have nothing to do with the database, that you're testing pure logic and you want that stuff to be faster. I appreciate that. But for my usage pattern, it's just not how I operate. So it doesn't really apply to me. So it just feels like overhead. There is that nice out though of you being able to use a new fixture to auto use stuff. But I didn't end up using that because, as we saw, some parts of the test plus fixture don't seem to actually work with all the test methods. And I will go probably write a bug or two about that and maybe commit a PR up to see if I can add to that. Although they might not exist for a reason. There might be implementation that is buried deep inside of Django's test case that they don't want to reintroduce. And I can appreciate that too, because all of that is maintenance burden. So that's kind of the core of it. Hopefully you saw the configuration, you saw me struggle with some setup, you saw me look through possible changes about it, the whole process, and then I showed some of the benefits of using Pytest assertions over classical unit test assertions, and how Pytest is able to infer more from the data because of the way it works internally. With that, I think that's going to bring us to a close for the evening. Next time, we'll either get back to my user feedback issues that I got from my spouse, or we'll work more on onboarding. I haven't really decided. It depends on how much I get through in the next week. But thanks for joining in. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time. Take care.